Ukrainian prisoners of war celebrated on Wednesday after Russia and Ukraine each agreed to release 175 captured troops. Moscow said it freed an additional 22 wounded Ukrainians as a goodwill gesture, following a phone call between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. But just hours after that call, in which a deal was reached to pause attacks on energy infrastructure, both Russia and Ukraine accused each other of violating the new agreement. Moscow said Ukraine hit an oil depot in southern Russia, while Kyiv said Russia had struck hospitals and homes and knocked out power to some of its railways. This all came on the same day that Trump had a phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that Trump described as very good. Before their conversation, Zelensky said Moscow's continued attacks showed its words did not match its actions, and that Russia was not ready for peace. He also said that the United States should be in charge of monitoring any ceasefire.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
The hour-long call on Wednesday between Trump and Zelensky was their first conversation since an Oval Office meeting descended into a shouting match in late February.
Intelligence sharing in terms of defense for Ukraine will continue to be shared.
Later, White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt said Zelensky asked Trump for additional air defense support, and that Trump said he would help locate the equipment in Europe. She also said Trump has moved beyond a previously negotiated U.S.-Ukraine minerals deal.
We've moved beyond just the economic minerals deal framework, and we're looking at a lasting ceasefire. Right now, we're at a partial ceasefire. But again, the president is sending his highly skilled, intelligent, and experienced team to Saudi Arabia later this week to continue fighting for peace in this conflict.
Trump has long promised to end Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II. But his outreach to Putin has unnerved European allies, who fear it heralds a fundamental shift after 80 years in which defending Europe from Russian expansionism was the core mission of U.S. foreign policy.
U.S. President Donald Trump will sign an executive order on Thursday that aims to shut down the Department of Education. According to a White House summary seen by Reuters, it's a long-awaited order that acts on a key campaign pledge by Trump, who has called the department a big con job. Trump's new Education Secretary Linda McMahon has defended the president's plan to abolish the department in what would be Trump's first shutdown of a cabinet-level agency. The order directs McMahon to, quote, take all necessary steps to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education and return education authority to the states, while continuing to ensure the effective and uninterrupted delivery of services, programs, and benefits on which Americans rely. According to the summary, the order also mandates that any programs or activities receiving remaining department funds should not, quote, advance DEI or gender ideology. However, Trump cannot shutter the agency without congressional legislation, which could prove difficult. Trump's Republicans hold a 53-47 majority in the Senate, but major legislation, such as a bill eliminating the Education Department, would need 60 votes and thus the support of 7 Democrats to pass. Senate Democrats have given no sign they would support the plan. The Education Department oversees some 100,000 public and 34,000 private schools in the country. Although more than 85% of public school funding comes from state and local governments, the department provides federal grants for needy schools and programs.
A U.S. judge has sided in part with detained Columbia University student Mahmoud Khalil in his battle with the Trump administration, which is trying to deport him. The judge denied a bid by the government to dismiss the case and said that Khalil must remain in the United States for now. But the judge did agree with the Justice Department that he didn't have jurisdiction over the case and moved it to New Jersey. That's where Khalil was held at the time his lawyers first challenged his arrest in New York. Neither Khalil's lawyers nor the Justice Department immediately responded to requests for comment. The case has become a flashpoint for President Donald Trump's pledge to deport some non-U.S. citizens who took part in protests against Israel's military campaign in Gaza. Khalil was arrested by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents on March 8th outside his university residence in Manhattan. His lawyers have said that he was targeted in retaliation for his role in advocating for Palestinian rights, meaning the arrest violated free speech protections under the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment. It will now be up to the New Jersey court to rule on Khalil's bids to declare his arrest unconstitutional and to be released on bail or moved out of immigration detention in Louisiana, where he is currently held.
The Israeli military said on Wednesday its forces have resumed ground operations in Gaza. And it said this is footage of their troops patrolling Gaza City. The military said its operations have extended Israel's control over the Netzarim corridor, which bisects Gaza. It described this as a, quote, focused manoeuvre aimed at creating a partial buffer zone between the north and south of the enclave. The move comes on the second day of airstrikes in Gaza, which have killed dozens, according to local health workers. Gaza health officials said Tuesday's airstrike killed over 400 people, marking one of the highest single-day death tolls since the beginning of the conflict. The United Nations said an Israeli airstrike had killed a foreign staffer and wounded several workers at the site of a UN headquarters in central Gaza City on Wednesday. But Israel denied this, saying it had hit a Hamas site, where it had detected preparations for firing into Israeli territory. Israel warned the onslaught was, quote, just the beginning. Both Israel and Hamas accuse each other of breaching the truce, which had offered respite for Gaza's 2.3 million residents after 17 months of war, which had reduced the enclave to rubble.
Hamas refused offer after offer.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that he'd ordered strikes because Hamas had rejected proposals to secure a ceasefire extension until April. Meanwhile, thousands of Israelis demonstrated against Netanyahu and his government on Wednesday. Many said the renewed fighting risked the lives of the remaining hostages still held by Hamas since October 7th, 2023. The war was triggered by a Hamas-led attack on southern Israel on October 7th, 2023, in which gunmen killed some 1,200 people and took about 250 hostages, according to Israeli tallies. Since then, Israel's campaign has killed more than 49,000 people in Gaza, Palestinian health authorities say, and caused a humanitarian crisis. Israel has accused Hamas of using Palestinian civilians as human shields. Hamas denies this and accuses Israel of indiscriminate
Palestinians
bombings.
in Gaza have weathered a year and a half of war and are used to making do without electricity. But a decision by the Israeli government to cut the supply of electricity, including to a crucial water treatment plant, has sparked fresh warnings of a dire health crisis. Ahmed Al-Rubai manages the water desalination plant in Deir el-Balah. The power cut has forced the plant to turn to fuel generators to keep operating. But fuel must be brought in through crossings, and crossings are controlled by Israel.
With the closure of the crossings and the shortage of fuel supplies, we currently cannot predict how long we can operate on generators. If the closure of crossings continues, the situation threatens to become a catastrophe.
He said daily clean water output has plummeted from 18,000 cubic meters to just 2,000 cubic meters, a drop of 80%. That means civilians may turn to contaminated water. Tariq Shaheen is the director of the Deir el-Balah municipality.
This threatens the spread of intestinal or skin diseases and reduced hygiene among citizens. Therefore, we expect that if the closure continues, God forbid, an environmental and health disaster will occur.
The war was triggered by a Hamas-led cross-border attack on southern Israel in October 2023 that killed 1,200 people and saw 251 taken hostage, according to Israeli tallies. Israel's retaliation has killed more than 48,000 Palestinians, according to Gaza health officials, left most of its people destitute, and razed much of the territory to the ground. Israel's energy minister instructed the state power company to cut sales of electricity to Gaza, which he described as a means of pressuring Hamas to free hostages. The first phase of a ceasefire that expired last week saw the release of some Israeli captives, or their bodies, in exchange for thousands of Palestinians held in Israeli jails. It's unclear whether the sides will proceed to a second phase.
The EU will tighten steel import quotas to reduce inflows by a further 15% from April. The news came from an EU official on Wednesday. It's aimed at preventing cheap steel flooding the European market after Washington imposed new tariffs. European steel producers are already battling high energy prices and competition from Asia and elsewhere. They warn that the EU risks becoming a dumping ground for cheap steel diverted from the US market, which they say could kill off Europe's plants. European Commission Executive Vice President Stéphane Séjourné.
There would be no country without steel, and so there is no collective organisation and industry of chemistry or defence without steel. And so steel is becoming a strategic sector for us that must be defended. We will try with our tools, and I think it is reasonable for the European Commission to follow international rules. I think that if there is a need today to have an actor in the world who gives predictability, who respects international law, who is also able to have a rule of law. In short, to have a regulatory environment that is predictable, it is the European Union.
The CEO of Europe's number 2 steelmaker ThyssenKrupp said on Wednesday the US imported around 23 million metric tons of steel last year, and that those volumes were now looking for other destinations, including Europe, as a result of US import tariffs. The Commission is to propose a raft of trade-related measures to boost its ailing metals industry, and will also consult aluminium producers facing similar headaches to steelmakers.